The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Astoria Palace as Princess Isabella Roseheart walked through the corridors with the confidence of someone born to rule. At 15 years old, she already possessed the commanding presence that marked true royalty. Her emerald eyes sharp with intelligence, and her auburn hair pinned back in the traditional style befitting a future queen. The servants bowed deeply as she passed, recognizing not just her title but the natural authority that seemed to radiate from her very being. Isabella had been raised by her grandmother, Queen Mother Evangeline, after her parents died in a tragic accident when she was merely 7 years old. The Queen Mother, known for her iron will and unwavering dedication to royal protocol, had shaped Isabella into a formidable young woman who understood the weight of duty and the importance of maintaining the dignity of the crown. Every lesson had been carefully crafted to prepare Isabella for the throne she would one day inherit, and every tradition had been explained as a sacred trust passed down through generations of Astoria's rulers. On this particular morning, Isabella was making her way to the grand ceremonial hall where the monthly changing of the guard was about to take place. This ancient ritual, dating back over 3 centuries, was considered one of the most important traditions in the kingdom. The royal guard, dressed in their magnificent scarlet uniforms with gold braiding, would perform the elaborate ceremony that symbolized the unbroken chain of protection that surrounded the royal family. Isabella had been attending these ceremonies since childhood, but today felt different somehow, as if the very air crackled with anticipation. As she entered the vast hall with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, Isabella noticed something that immediately caught her attention. The ceremonial swords, which should have been positioned at precisely 45-degree angles according to tradition, were instead laid flat against the ceremonial table. The breach of protocol was subtle, perhaps unnoticeable to untrained eyes, but to Isabella, who had been taught to observe every detail of royal ceremony, it stood out like a glaring error. Her jaw tightened as she realized that someone had either forgotten the proper positioning or, worse, had deliberately altered the sacred arrangement. Captain Marcus Blackwood, the head of the Royal Guard, stood at attention near the ceremonial table, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he supervised the preparations. He was a man in his 50s who had served the royal family for over 20 years, earning his position through unwavering loyalty and exceptional skill. Behind him, the guards maintained their positions with military precision, their faces hidden beneath the traditional ceremonial masks that had been worn during these ceremonies for generations. The silence in the hall was broken only by the soft sound of footsteps on marble and the distant chiming of the palace clock tower. Isabella's mind raced as she considered her options. As future queen, she had the authority to correct the error, but doing so would require her to interrupt the ceremony and potentially embarrass Captain Blackwood in front of his men. On the other hand, allowing the breach of protocol to continue would be seen as weakness and could set a dangerous precedent for future ceremonies. The weight of leadership pressed down upon her young shoulders as she realized that this moment would test everything her grandmother had taught her about the balance between authority and diplomacy. The Queen Mother had often told her that true leadership required the courage to act decisively when tradition was threatened, regardless of the personal cost. Isabella could almost hear her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind, reminding her that the crown demanded absolute respect for protocol, and that even the smallest deviation could lead to the erosion of the monarchy's authority. With this wisdom guiding her, Isabella stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding, as she prepared to address the situation that threatened to compromise the dignity of the ceremony she held so dear. The assembled guards turned their attention to the young princess as she moved with purpose across the hall, her royal bearing evident in every step. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to illuminate her path as she approached the ceremonial table, her determination growing stronger with each passing moment. This would be the first time she had ever issued a direct command to the royal guard, and she knew that how she handled this situation would be remembered and discussed throughout the palace for years to come. Princess Isabella approached the ceremonial table with measured steps, her heart pounding beneath her composed exterior as she prepared to exercise her royal authority for the first time in such a formal setting. The weight of generations of tradition seemed to rest upon her shoulders as she drew closer to Captain Blackwood, who remained standing at attention, seemingly unaware of the protocol breach that had caught the princess's keen eye. The other guards maintained their positions, but Isabella could sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as word of her approach began to ripple through their ranks. "Captain Blackwood," Isabella said, her voice carrying the clear, authoritative tone she had practiced countless times in her lessons with the Queen Mother. "I must speak with you regarding the ceremonial arrangements." Her words cut through the silence of the hall like a blade, causing several guards to glance in her direction despite their training to remain focused straight ahead. Captain Blackwood turned to face her, his expression respectful but puzzled, as he tried to understand what had prompted the princess to interrupt the pre-ceremony preparations. "Your Royal Highness," Captain Blackwood replied with a deep bow, his voice steady and professional. "How may I be of service?" Isabella gestured toward the ceremonial swords with a graceful movement of her hand, her emerald eyes fixed upon the improper placement that violated centuries of carefully maintained tradition. "The ceremonial swords are not positioned according to protocol, Captain. They should be angled at precisely 45 degrees, not laid flat as they currently are. This arrangement has been maintained since the reign of King Aldrich the Great, and I cannot permit any deviation from this sacred tradition." The captain's eyes widened slightly as he followed her gaze to the ceremonial table, and Isabella could see the moment when he realized the error. His face flushed with embarrassment as he quickly moved to examine the swords more closely, confirming what the princess had observed. "Your Royal Highness, this is indeed incorrect." "I apologize for this oversight." He turned toward his men, clearly intending to correct the mistake immediately. But Isabella raised her hand to stop him, her expression thoughtful as she considered the broader implications of what had occurred. "Tell me, Captain," Isabella continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "who was responsible for arranging the ceremonial items this morning?" The question hung in the air as Captain Blackwood's discomfort became more apparent. He glanced toward the guards before responding. "Sergeant Williams was assigned to the ceremonial preparations, Your Royal Highness, but the final responsibility rests with me as commander of the guard." Isabella nodded slowly, appreciating his willingness to accept accountability, but she could sense there was more to this situation than a simple mistake. At that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hall, and Isabella turned to see Lady Cordelia Thornfield entering the ceremonial space with her usual air of confidence. Lady Cordelia was the Queen Mother's chief advisor, and had been a powerful figure in the palace for many years, wielding considerable influence over court protocols and ceremonies. She was a woman in her late 50s, with silver hair always perfectly arranged and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her relationship with Isabella had always been complex, as she often challenged the princess's decisions in what she claimed were efforts to provide guidance and wisdom. "Princess Isabella," Lady Cordelia said with a curtsy that managed to convey both respect and subtle condescension, "I see you've noticed the ceremonial arrangements. I took the liberty of instructing the guards to modify the traditional positioning to better accommodate the visiting dignitaries who will be observing today's ceremony. The flat positioning allows for better visibility from the guest viewing area." Her explanation was delivered with the smooth confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating palace politics, but Isabella could detect an underlying challenge in her tone. Isabella felt her spine straighten as she processed Lady Cordelia's words. The modification had not been an error, but a deliberate change made without consulting her, despite the fact that as future queen she should have been informed of any alterations to ceremonial protocols. The realization that Lady Cordelia had bypassed her authority in favor of what she deemed practical considerations sparked a flame of indignation within the young princess. This was not merely about sword positioning. It was about respect for her position and the preservation of traditions that defined the monarchy itself. "Lady Cordelia," Isabella replied, her voice remaining steady despite the anger building within her. "While I appreciate your concern for our guests' viewing experience, the ceremonial protocols are not subject to modification for convenience. These traditions have been maintained for centuries because they represent the continuity and dignity of our monarchy. I must insist that the swords be repositioned, according to the proper protocol, immediately." The confrontation was now clearly defined, with Isabella asserting her authority against someone who had far more experience in palace politics, but significantly less legitimate power. The tension in the grand ceremonial hall became palpable as Lady Cordelia's expression shifted from polite deference to barely concealed irritation at Princess Isabella's firm stance against her modifications. The older woman had clearly not expected the 15-year-old princess to challenge her decision so directly, particularly in front of the royal guard, who now found themselves caught between conflicting authorities within the palace hierarchy. Captain Blackwood and his men remained at attention, but Isabella could sense their discomfort as they witnessed what was essentially a power struggle between two influential figures in the royal household. "Your Royal Highness," Lady Cordelia said, her tone becoming more pointed. "With respect, you may not be fully aware of all the considerations involved in today's ceremony. The ambassador from Valeria and his delegation are our most important guests in months, and maintaining positive diplomatic relations requires certain accommodations. The Queen Mother herself approved these arrangements when I briefed her yesterday evening." The mention of the Queen Mother's approval was clearly intended to end the discussion, as Lady Cordelia had learned over the years that invoking the highest authority in the kingdom usually silenced any opposition. Isabella felt a moment of uncertainty ripple through her confidence as she heard her grandmother's name used to justify the protocol breach. The Queen Mother's word was indeed law within the palace, and if she had truly approved the changes, then Isabella would be overstepping her bounds to countermand them. However, something about Lady Cordelia's claim felt wrong to the princess, who had spent countless hours with her grandmother discussing the importance of maintaining traditions even in the face of political pressure. The Queen Mother had often emphasized that true strength came from unwavering adherence to principles regardless of external circumstances. "I find that difficult to believe, Lady Cordelia," Isabella replied after a moment of careful consideration, her voice carrying a new edge of determination. "My grandmother has repeatedly stressed the importance of maintaining ceremonial protocols without exception. If she did indeed approve these changes, then I would like to confirm this with her directly before proceeding." The princess's challenge sent a clear message that she was not willing to simply accept Lady Cordelia's word, particularly when it involved compromising traditions she held sacred. Lady Cordelia's composure slipped slightly as she realized her authority was being questioned in a very public manner. The guards were witnessing every word of this exchange, and news of such confrontations had a way of spreading throughout the palace with remarkable speed. "Princess Isabella, the Queen Mother is currently in her morning meetings and cannot be disturbed. The ceremony must proceed as scheduled, and there is no time for such consultations. I assure you that my arrangements have been properly authorized." Her insistence on moving forward revealed her growing desperation to avoid having her claims investigated. Isabella studied Lady Cordelia's face carefully, noting the subtle signs of anxiety that had begun to manifest despite her attempts to maintain control. Years of observation and training under her grandmother's tutelage had taught Isabella to read people's expressions and body language, skills that were proving invaluable in this moment of confrontation. She was becoming increasingly convinced that Lady Cordelia was lying about the Queen Mother's approval, and this realization strengthened her resolve to stand firm on the matter of protocol. "Captain Blackwood," Isabella said, turning to address the head of the royal guard directly while keeping her eyes fixed on Lady Cordelia, "I am giving you a direct order as your future queen. The ceremonial swords must be repositioned to their proper angles according to traditional protocol. This modification is unauthorized and must be corrected immediately." Her words carried the full weight of royal authority, and she spoke with the confidence of someone who knew she was acting within her rights and responsibilities as heir to the throne. The captain found himself in an extremely uncomfortable position as he looked between Princess Isabella and Lady Cordelia, both of whom represented significant authority within the palace hierarchy. Years of military service had taught him the importance of following the chain of command, but the current situation presented a complex challenge to that principle. Lady Cordelia was a senior advisor with considerable influence over palace operations, while Princess Isabella was the future queen whose authority would one day be absolute. His decision in this moment could have lasting consequences for his career and his relationship with both women. "Your Royal Highness," Captain Blackwood began carefully, his military training evident in his measured response, "I am prepared to follow your orders. But I must note that Lady Cordelia has been coordinating the ceremonial arrangements, as she has done for many years. Perhaps we could—" His attempt to find a diplomatic solution was interrupted by Lady Cordelia, who clearly sensed that her control over the situation was slipping away and decided to take a more aggressive approach to reassert her authority. "Captain Blackwood," Lady Cordelia interjected sharply, her voice carrying a tone that brooked no argument. You will maintain the current arrangements as I have instructed. The Princess Isabella, despite her future position, does not yet have the authority to override decisions that have been made by senior palace officials in consultation with the Queen Mother. I order you to proceed with the ceremony as planned, without any modifications to the current setup. Her counter-command created an impossible situation for the captain, who now faced directly conflicting orders from two people who both claimed legitimate authority over his actions. The standoff in the grand ceremonial hall reached a critical moment as Captain Blackwood found himself caught between two irreconcilable commands from figures of authority within the royal household. The weight of the decision before him was enormous, as choosing to follow either Princess Isabella or Lady Cordelia would inevitably create lasting consequences with the other party. The assembled guards remained motionless, but the tension was so thick that even their disciplined composure seemed strained as they witnessed this unprecedented confrontation between royal protocol. Princess Isabella recognized the impossible position she had placed Captain Blackwood in, but she also understood that this moment would define her future relationship with the palace staff and her ability to exercise authority when she eventually took the throne. If she backed down now, word would spread throughout the kingdom that she could be overruled by anyone willing to invoke her grandmother's name, whether truthfully or not. The legacy of strong leadership that the Queen Mother had worked so hard to instill in her granddaughter hung in the balance of this seemingly simple dispute over ceremonial sword placement. Captain Blackwood, Isabella said, her voice taking on the unmistakable tone of royal command that had been passed down through generations of Astoria's rulers. I understand the difficulty of this situation, but I must remind you that your oath of service was sworn to the crown itself, not to any individual advisor. As the rightful heir to that crown, my authority in matters of royal protocol supersedes any other consideration. You will reposition those swords according to tradition, and you will do so immediately. Her words carried a finality that left no room for further debate or diplomatic maneuvering. Lady Cordelia's face flushed with anger as she realized that Princess Isabella was not going to be intimidated or manipulated into withdrawing her command. Years of wielding behind-the-scenes influence had not prepared her for such direct confrontation with a member of the royal family who was willing to use her legitimate authority so boldly. You are making a grave mistake, Princess Isabella, she hissed, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic courtesy. Your inexperience is showing, and you will regret this display of stubbornness when you must face the diplomatic consequences of your actions. The threat implicit in Lady Cordelia's words only strengthened Isabella's resolve, as she recognized the woman's attempt to use fear and intimidation to maintain control over palace operations. The princess had watched her grandmother face similar challenges over the years, and she had learned that showing weakness in the face of such tactics only encouraged further attempts at manipulation. The only mistake being made here, Lady Cordelia, is your assumption that you can override royal authority with claims of administrative necessity. I am not inexperienced. I am simply unwilling to compromise the dignity of our traditions for the sake of convenience. Captain Blackwood made his decision with the decisive action of a career military officer who had faced difficult choices before. He stepped forward and bowed deeply to Princess Isabella, his voice clear and unwavering as he spoke. Your Royal Highness, the Royal Guard serves the crown above all else. I will carry out your orders immediately. He turned to his men with crisp efficiency, issuing commands that sent them into motion to correct the positioning of the ceremonial swords. The sound of their coordinated movement filled the hall as they worked to restore the proper protocol with the precision that marked true professionals. Lady Cordelia watched in stunned silence as her authority was definitively rejected in favor of the princess's command. The reality of her defeat settled over her like a cold shadow, and she began to realize that her relationship with the future queen had been fundamentally altered by this confrontation. Years of accumulated influence and careful relationship building had been swept away in a matter of minutes by her own overreach and miscalculation. The political landscape of the palace had shifted, and she was no longer on the winning side. As the guards worked to reposition the ceremonial swords with practiced efficiency, Princess Isabella felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with the sobering awareness of what she had just accomplished. She had successfully exercised her royal authority against significant opposition, but she also understood that this victory would likely create new challenges and enemies within the palace hierarchy. Lady Cordelia would not forget this humiliation, and Isabella would need to be prepared for future attempts at retaliation or sabotage. The ceremonial swords were soon positioned at their proper 45-degree angles, their polished surfaces gleaming in the morning sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows of the hall. The restoration of proper protocol seemed to lift a weight from the atmosphere, as if the very building itself approved of the return to tradition. Captain Blackwood reported the completion of the task with military precision, his respect for the princess clearly evident in his manner and tone. "Thank you, Captain Blackwood," Isabella said with genuine gratitude, recognizing that his decision to support her had required considerable courage and could potentially create difficulties for him with other palace officials. "Your loyalty to the crown and to our traditions will be remembered." The acknowledgement was both a personal thanks and a public recognition that would help protect the captain from any retaliation Lady Cordelia might attempt in the future. Isabella was learning that leadership required not only the courage to make difficult decisions, but also the wisdom to protect those who supported her in carrying out those decisions. Fifth part. The aftermath of the confrontation in the grand ceremonial hall created ripples throughout the palace that would be felt for months to come. Word of Princess Isabella's bold assertion of authority spread quickly among the servants, guards, and courtiers, carried by whispered conversations and meaningful glances that conveyed far more than words ever could. The 15-year-old princess had demonstrated a level of decisive leadership that surprised many who had underestimated her maturity and commitment to royal traditions. For the first time since her parents' death, Isabella felt truly ready to embrace the responsibilities that would one day be hers as queen. Lady Cordelia retreated from the ceremonial hall in defeat, her usual confidence shattered by the public rejection of her authority. As she walked through the palace corridors, she could feel the eyes of the staff upon her, and she knew that her reputation as an untouchable power broker had been irreparably damaged. The carefully constructed network of influence she had built over decades of service now seemed fragile and uncertain as people began to recalculate their loyalties in light of what they had witnessed. Her relationship with Princess Isabella would never recover from this confrontation, and she began to consider whether her position in the palace remained viable. The changing of the guard ceremony proceeded with flawless precision, the restored protocol lending an air of dignity and gravitas that had been missing from Lady Cordelia's modified arrangement. The visiting ambassador from Valeria and his delegation watched with obvious appreciation for the ancient traditions they were witnessing, their respect for Astoria's royal customs evident in their attentive silence and respectful demeanor. Princess Isabella observed the ceremony from her traditional position, noting with satisfaction that the proper sword angles created exactly the symbolic impact that centuries of royal protocol had intended to achieve. Captain Blackwood supervised the ceremony with renewed confidence, knowing that his decision to support Princess Isabella had been vindicated by the positive reception from the diplomatic guests. The guards performed their duties with exceptional precision, as if the restoration of proper protocol had reminded them of the sacred nature of their service to the crown. The ancient words of the ceremonial oath echoed through the hall with particular resonance, creating a connection between past and present that strengthened everyone's commitment to preserving the traditions of the monarchy. When Queen Mother Evangeline learned of the morning's events, her reaction surprised many who expected anger at the disruption of carefully planned diplomatic arrangements. Instead, the elderly monarch expressed pride in her granddaughter's decisive leadership and unwavering commitment to royal protocol. Isabella has shown today that she understands the true meaning of sovereignty, the Queen Mother told her private secretary. She did not allow convenience or political pressure to compromise the dignity of our traditions, even when faced with claims of my own authorization. That is precisely the kind of strength a future queen must possess. The Queen Mother's approval of Isabella's actions sent its own message throughout the palace hierarchy, effectively ending any possibility that Lady Cordelia might seek retaliation or attempt to undermine the princess's authority in the future. Court observers noted the subtle but unmistakable shift in power dynamics that followed the ceremonial hall confrontation, with Princess Isabella emerging as a force to be respected and consulted on matters of royal protocol and tradition. Her transition from protected heir to active leader had begun in earnest, accelerated by her willingness to stand firm when her principles were challenged. In the days that followed, Princess Isabella found herself approached by various palace officials seeking her input on matters that had previously been handled without royal consultation. The staff had clearly recognized that she was no longer content to remain a passive observer of palace operations, and they adjusted their behavior accordingly. Isabella welcomed these opportunities to learn more about the practical aspects of royal administration, while ensuring that her grandmother's teachings about tradition and protocol continued to guide all ceremonial activities. Lady Cordelia's influence within the palace began to wane as others distanced themselves from someone who had so dramatically miscalculated the political situation. Within weeks, she submitted her resignation and departed for a quieter position in the countryside. Her career in royal service effectively ended by her confrontation with Princess Isabella. The palace staff noted her departure with a mixture of relief and caution, understanding that the old ways of operating through unofficial channels and assumed authority would no longer be tolerated under the future queen's watchful eye. The diplomatic relationships with Valeria and other kingdoms actually strengthened as a result of the properly conducted ceremony, with several ambassadors commenting favorably on Astoria's commitment to preserving its royal traditions in an era when many monarchies were abandoning their historical protocols. Princess Isabella's insistence on maintaining ceremonial dignity had enhanced rather than damaged the kingdom's international reputation, proving that her grandmother's teachings about the importance of tradition were as relevant as ever in the modern world. As months passed, the incident in the ceremonial hall became part of palace lore, remembered as the moment when Princess Isabella truly began her journey toward becoming a queen. The young woman who had once been seen as a grieving child being raised by her grandmother was now recognized as a formidable leader who would not compromise her principles for the sake of convenience or political expediency. The crown's authority had been tested and proven strong, ensuring that when Isabella eventually took the throne, she would do so with the respect and support of all who served the monarchy. The lesson of that morning resonated far beyond the immediate participants, teaching everyone in the palace that true authority came not from behind-the-scenes manipulation or claims of administrative necessity, but from the legitimate power of the crown exercised with wisdom, courage, and unwavering commitment to the traditions that defined the kingdom itself. Princess Isabella had proven herself worthy of the throne she would inherit, and the future of Astoria's monarchy had never looked more secure.